Good morning, everyone. It is Friday at 11 a.m., first Friday in December, and the first Friday of our likely brief, but still perhaps eventful lame duck legislative session. My name is Alex Rossman. I'm the External Affairs Director at the Michigan League for Public Policy. I do our media relations work and a portion of our government relations work. And each week at 11 on Fridays, I hop on our Facebook page to break down what's been happening in the previous week from a policy standpoint, particularly from the league's lens, but also looking at the political landscape, which continues to be ever evolving in the aftermath of the election. And so trying to connect that to our policy work at the league, as well as the issues that you and our other partners support. First going through the substantive policy side of the week, and I want to start off with a few proactive things. First and foremost, the Michigan League for Public Policy and a number of partners. Let's see if I can get the list completely accurate, but Michigan's Children, Mothering Justice, the Accounting Aid Society, the Michigan Association of United Ways, United Way of Northwest Michigan, United Way for Southeastern Michigan. They all have interesting localized names, different formats, and Mothering Justice, and I may have already said that once, and Michigan Community Action. So a number of different organizations, all very closely working on policies to help families with lower incomes and to help kids. We have combined our efforts in the remaining few weeks of 2022 to make a big push for action at the federal level on permanently expanding the federal child tax credit. There were a lot of very good positive changes made to the child tax credit, as I imagine most people tuning in today that either received that themselves or work for an organization that was an advocate for that. But as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, Congress and President Biden passed a number of positive reforms to the child tax credit. For a while, we were really pushing for those changes to be made permanent as part of the Build Back Better plan. Build Back Better plan ended up being Build Back Better Light and did not touch upon the child tax credit at all. So that's still an outstanding need. And talking about how politics and policy intersect, the fact that the Democratic trifecta at the federal level is in its waning weeks, and that the end of this lame duck legislative session and the end of this calendar year will be the end of the House majority for the Democrats, making it significantly unlikely to see any action on a child tax credit improvement in the new legislative session. So at minimum, we essentially have 2 weeks to get this done, or we're going to have to wait 2 years, if not more. So we just put out a press release this week on a great national report that our partners at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities put together, really quantifying the impact of inaction on the child tax credit. For Michigan, the data is more than 500,000 Michigan children could be pushed into poverty if Congress fails to expand the child tax credit. And we saw, kind of the positive impacts on child poverty. For those of you that regularly have been following the league's work and these weekly updates, the positive impacts of the expanded child tax credit were a focal point of our kids count data releases over the summer, and included an advocacy push for permanency in that. But now certainly the two important pieces of context for right now with the child tax credit and why it is so urgent right now is one, Congress is planning to extend a number of tax breaks for profitable corporations. And this is something that needs to be renewed every few years, is essentially a foregone conclusion that Congress is going to pass that and extend those tax breaks for corporations. And so the real crux of the advocacy push right now is that if Congress is going to do that and attend to some tax changes to benefit businesses and corporations, that they being Congress should equally be looking at doing more to support working families, especially those at the lower end of the income scale, those that have been hit hardest by inflation and some of the economic impacts of the pandemic. And so that is one piece is the push to say if you are going to extend tax breaks for corporations, to also look at ways to directly help workers and families and kids. And then the other piece, as I just mentioned, is the urgency of the time frame and the changing political landscape in Washington come January that will likely impede any action on a child tax credit moving forward. So I think we'll also, if we have not already, put in a link to an article by the Michigan Advance last week that our tax policy analyst Ann Cunin was quoted in on a different study by a different national organization that found childhood hunger in Michigan has worsened since the extended federal child tax credit ended. So again, a research and database organization and two shiny pieces of research and data to emphasize the need for action on this. This is going to be a really big push for our organization and all those great partners I listed a few minutes ago in these next few weeks. It's likely that the federal lame duck session will be done by December 16th. And so we really do have about 2 weeks to work with our federal elected officials on that. And a final note on that piece, that our congressional delegation, Democratic members of our congressional delegation, I think it broke along party lines, the vote on the American Rescue Plan Act. But our Democratic congressional delegation for Michigan has been very strong on the child tax credit in general, as well as the American Rescue Rescue Plan Act that expanded those. And part of why I fumbled there is I was pulling up another link quickly. But two of our current members of Congress, Representative Andy Levin, who will be done in Washington at the end of this year, and then Representative Rashida Tlaib. They both signed a letter along with 56 other members of the U.S. House, urging congressional leadership, Speaker Pelosi and Senate Leader Schumer, to expand the child tax credit, as well as the income tax credit, as part of the discussions on corporate tax breaks. So a few of our members of Michigan members of Congress have signed on to that letter. Also, U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow in particular. She and Alyssa Slotkin held a press conference last summer that I attended with a number of other Lansing area child advocates, touting the expanded child tax credit in the American Rescue Plan Act. And then also Senator Stabenow is particularly significant because of the committee she sits on and how high up she is in the Senate on serving in important positions on the Finance Committee and the Budget Committee, which these potential tax changes would likely come through there. So quick rundown on that. This will, again, be a big focus of the leagues in the next few weeks. So please do continue to keep an eye on our social media with additional advocacy opportunities and action alerts, additional media work, and even potentially, depending on what else is going on in the state lame duck session next week. In the next week or two, we might try and have a Yeas and Nays singularly focused on the child tax credit and the benefits for Michigan parents. The other proactive piece that has been a top priority of the leagues this legislative session and continues to be in the waning perhaps days of our state legislative lame duck session is expanding the state earned income tax credit to 30%. We've been part of a really great broad coalition, both in size and scope. The variety of sectors and perspectives that are represented, not just the league and United Ways from around the state and Michigan Community Action and Michigan's Children and other service providers and child advocates and worker advocates, but also a number of business groups and faith groups, the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, Michigan Manufacturing Association, a number of local chambers of commerce as well. Just a real broad Michigan Future, who has been a lead partner on this effort, have really been pushing for this and continue to push for it to happen now, even though it is likely a top priority for the new Democratic majorities in the new legislative session. There's a pretty significant impact just in waiting a few weeks because it's a tax credit. It's relative to the tax year. And so if an EITC increase got passed now or in December of 2022, that would impact taxpayers in 2023, and about 750,000 taxpayers, I believe, is the number that would benefit from an expanded income tax credit. And the passage this session would ensure it happens next year. Otherwise, if the legislation is not moved until 2023, the first tax year that it would have an impact is 2024. And so essentially moving that, the benefits of that down the line a year, which I'm sure for any of you that work closely with individuals who are struggling to make ends meet right now, the sooner we can offer them support and additional money back in their pockets, the better. So there was a great discussion earlier this week with Lou Glazer from Michigan Future and former Republican legislator who is now the Kent County Treasurer, Pete McGregor, who is also on the board of Michigan Future. Not sure if I said the right legislative office. He was a former state senator, perhaps state representative prior to that, but is the current Kent County Treasurer. And they had a discussion earlier this week on the benefits of Michigan's earned income tax credit, both on workers and households directly, but also on the broader community. That's something that the league has quantified, the economic impact by county based on the number of potential EITC recipients and the amount of the credit, because the EITC tends to get spent back out very quickly in the community on vital needs, whether it's kind of a big ticket item that people have been putting off due to financial needs, like a car repair, getting a new appliance, or just more kind of daily needs, school supplies and clothes for kids, food, groceries, prescriptions, all of that. But the EITC in particular tends to go right back out into the economy and through small businesses. So there's a lot of facets of why this is good policy, why it would be good policy to pursue as soon as possible, from both an individual worker and family perspective that is the league's primary lens, but also from a workforce standpoint as well as an economic one. So again, continuing to advocate for that in these next few weeks as well. A couple other policy updates. The Senate, state Senate, did meet one day this week for the official first. I think first official. Maybe there was some previous activity. It feels like the first real substantive lame duck session day. Where they started moving pertinent things. And so a couple policy updates I wanted to share that had action or inaction this week, and also things that are just percolating for the remainder of lame duck. One, some positive bipartisan housing legislation was finalized by the Senate this week and now goes on to the governor for her signature into law. Those had been crafted again by members of both sides of the aisle in the Senate, closely involved with the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce and some other business groups, local government, the Michigan Municipal League, and the Home Builders Association of Michigan, as part of the Housing Michigan Coalition that did work on these bills. So, we are very interested in any and all policy efforts to make housing more accessible, more affordable, including even just in improving and expanding housing stock, as well as working on housing affordability. And so good to see those bills finalized and passed and on to the governor for her signature into law. Then a couple other big issues or priorities of the legislature that moved and didn't quite successfully move this week. One is legislation that would move Michigan's presidential primary earlier in the election year, perhaps the first or one of the first, maybe preceding the Iowa caucui. Yes, a move to make it one of the first from the second Tuesday in March to the second Tuesday in February. So a whole month earlier, and potentially preempting Iowa and New Hampshire and some of those other states that are so known for being the early presidential battlegrounds that they are ubiquitous in political TV and movies, and as well as actual political campaigns. And so certainly an interesting discussion to try and improve Michigan's relevancy and focus during the presidential primary. And so that bill did pass out of the Michigan Senate, nearly unanimous, 34-1. And now needs to be taken up by the House next week. And then another issue that the league has been keeping an eye on. I know some of our partners that are even more squarely steeped in the mental health world have been watching this even closer. But there have been bills percolating for a year or more that would significantly overhaul the state's mental health system, mental health and behavioral health. This has been a top priority of Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey. And the basics of it is a move to more privatization of the industry and services. And so our partners at Michigan Community Mental Health Association have had a lot of concerns with that. Our organization and our current CEO, who comes from a previous background working more directly on behavioral health and mental health, has raised some concerns about the bills and privatization. These seem like a long shot to move a couple months ago. But as lame duck is wont to do, and leaders have priorities that they are really, really trying to have be kind of policy legacies. There's a last minute final push to get these done. So this was interesting, and I was trying in earnest to find an accessible news article on this. I did not see one, but encourage you to take a look as well. So just flagged a tweet thread from Gongward reporters at Gorchow on the bills being put up for a vote and being voted down, being defeated. I did not double check as I'm saying this procedurally. Sometimes when that happens, the majority is basically able to hit the undo button and take that bill back off the board, so it doesn't officially count as a final vote and a defeat. So I'm not sure if they did that or not. Sometimes they put up a bill just to see where members are at and how many more votes they need to try and generate. But it is likely, at least for now, that issue is tabled and did not have enough support to pass. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that and share more information next Friday as we see how that is going. And then the other big issue that sort of came up legislatively this week, and I'm sure has been coming up in your news outlets and your social media news feeds, is the discussion about the fate of Michigan's minimum wage, which is thankfully set to increase significantly in the new year, both the standard minimum wage and the tip minimum wage, after a lot of thorough and enduring legal work from our partners at One Fair Wage and the Restaurant Opportunity Center and Mothering Justice that were part of the ballot initiatives in 2018 that the Michigan League for Public Policy endorsed and supported, one that would establish minimum wage increases that at the time were passed as gradual step increases. And then a separate ballot initiative that would mandate paid sick leave for all workers of certain employees. And at the time, during a very contentious, active lame duck legislative session, Republican legislators used what was called an adopt and amend strategy, which is what has been legally challenged and most recently ruled unconstitutional, is where the legislature took up public referendums, adopted them to keep them off the ballot in the election, and then after the fact changed them and watered them down from what the original intent was and what voters had signed petitions for and what they had planned to vote on. But the flip side of that now is there potentially is a very big jump in those wage increases. There's still some legal potential legal challenges and wrangling going on, but right now those changes are set to take effect in February, and there's still a lot of back and forth on kind of the advocacy front and a little bit politically to try and slow that implementation down. A lot of business organizations are very actively engaged on that and concerned about how much of a financial hit a big jump in those wages to their workers would be, kind of out of the blue, admittedly. In the same breath, it's important to note that it is out of the blue because of some partisan maneuvers that held this up for 2 years. It was meant to be a gradual implementation, and the reason it might not be is because of things that the legislature did 4 years ago that delayed them. So, the flip side of the argument is Michigan minimum wage workers and Michigan tipped wage workers should have been making more money this whole time since 2018, should have been getting more money, and haven't because of this. And now it's been ruled that they should have been. And so there's certainly an argument for they have waited long enough. Why wait further? And so on the policy front, let's see if I can recall the bill number, but a new bill was just introduced this week, and what was called read in during the one day of Senate session this week. That essentially is a formal part of the process that is necessary to make a bill official, to get it on the Michigan legislature's website, to get it assigned to a committee. It needs to be read in, and it was done this week. And it would freeze the tipped wage increase permanently. So not a slowdown of the implementation, but on a tipped wage in particular, which from our standpoint, and I would imagine a lot of tipped wage workers' standpoints, one of the biggest needs in increasing the minimum wage came from that population, the tipped wage worker population. I was talking to another government relations staffer, and we were both talking about previous jobs in the restaurant industry, and the idea that the law says that your employer is supposed to, if you're a tipped wage worker, your employer, and I don't remember if that's at the end of every shift or at the end of every pay period, is supposedly supposed to reconcile the disparity between a standard minimum wage, what you would have earned, and what you made with tips. So, you work a slow shift or lots of slow shifts, you don't make a lot in tips. Theoretically, your employer was supposed to supplement the difference between the tipped wage and the standard minimum wage, and that just was not happening. Workers didn't really know what was supposed to happen. Businesses either, I think in some instances, probably didn't know it was supposed to happen. In other instances, were not eager to make it happen, if not asked. But definitely some specific concerns for the tipped wage population that this new bill introduced, 1233, raises a lot of concerns. We would be strongly opposed to this bill if it comes up. It is kind of interesting from a procedural standpoint, and again, kind of an insider's, or at least a former insider's perspective, that normally when bills are coming up out of the blue, this was just more or less written and introduced this week. It's not one of these bills that was introduced, in January of 2021 and all of a sudden might move. The bill was just written. And usually when that's happening in lame duck, they don't go through the added layer of process to send it to a committee and have a committee hearing. If there is a desire by the majority party in either body to move a bill, certainly a new bill kind of out of the blue, they usually do what's called just discharge it to the floor and immediately take it up for a vote. They would not assign it to a committee, which they did with this one. So still trying to, admittedly, from my standpoint, figure out the concrete chances of this going anywhere. Certainly important to take any bill before the legislature seriously. Keeping an eye out to see, it was referred to the Senate Economic and Small Business Development Committee. So it is possible that a hearing would get posted next week. We would certainly be keeping an eye on that and be sharing information with our supporters so that we can put in testimony and cards of opposition to that bill. And again, connect it to data and show why that bill could be problematic. So still waiting to see its chances of happening. The other important procedural note on this bill is there's something called a 5-day rule, which is not to be confused with the Beastie Boys' 3-minute rule. Shout out to Paul's Boutique. But the 5-day rule is that there has to be 5 days between one body between the House and Senate taking action on a bill and the other taking it up. And so right now, next week is the only days that the House and Senate have scheduled for lame duck. Again, this bill I am mentioning was read in, so it has been introduced, but it has not been voted on. So if the Senate were to take it up in the full Senate, not just the committee, take it up next week, the House would have to come back in the following week to vote on it. And as of right now, that is not scheduled. Everything I'm hearing kind of behind the scenes is it's a real long shot that that the House or Senate would like to come in another week, but really preparing for every possibility. So that's the rundown on that bill. Again, we will keep you posted on a potential posting of the committee hearing and any work that we do on that in terms of preparing testimony, press statements, information our partners put together. We'll continue to keep you posted on that. Now kind of pivoting, there's a little bit of a mix of this every Yeas and Nays of policy focus and political focus, but the timing right now between the election and the new legislative session makes this a weightier portion of our weekly updates. So in particular, today, having some big news as well. I'm not sure, potentially such big news that it's not on the on news sites yet. I'm just going to do one more quick Google search and see if anything has popped up. But the governor's office announced that some of department directors are leaving and changing, and that some of the executive staff is changing. So let's see if I can pull this up. I signed up for an pro tip. You can also sign up for the governor's press release distribution list. That is what I am trying to read from right here. That enables me to get news pretty much hot off the presses, and as soon as it's potentially official, even if there isn't an online component yet. So here is a few of the changes that the governor announced today to her cabinet and agency leadership. Dan Eichinger is going to be new acting director of the Department of Environmental, Great Lakes, and Energy. Michelle Lang as director of the Department of Technology, Management, and Budget. Current Senator and veteran Adam Hollier is going to be the new director of the Veterans Affairs Agency. Brian Hanna as executive director of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency. Brad Weiferick, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, as acting director of the Department of Transportation, and Kathy Anger, who is a former state representative that I worked with when I was working in the Senate. She is going to be the new acting director of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and Shannon Lott, the new acting director of the Department of Natural Resources. So those new acting directors, as you might have gathered, are because quite a few department executive directors announced that they are stepping down and pursuing other opportunities. Not entirely unexpected. The time after a re-election and a new term is kind of the right time, the ideal time from an individual perspective to make a change that is also frankly, most thoughtful of the governor and the administration there's just kind of a clean transition as the legislature turns over, certainly as new legislative majorities take place. So not surprising to have some changes there. I think it's fairly standard, and particularly in this window of time between a governor's first term and second term, but still some big changes. Having a lot of department directors that have been there. I think a few, if not all, of the departing directors have been in those positions from the beginning of Governor Whitmer's first term. So there is some longevity there. But also some good promotion and transitions from within or from individuals with extensive backgrounds in the issues being referred to. I'm scrolling down to see if I can get to the staff portions, because the governor's office also announced some changes to her office's staff and this actually transitions nicely to some new updates from the Speaker-elect's staff announcements. But the governor announced that one of her senior advisors and a former colleague and current friend of mine, Shaquila Myers, is going to be the new chief of staff to Speaker-elect Joe Tate. She also served as Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist's chief of staff for some time as well. Deputy Chief of Staff in the governor's office, Melanie Brown, has taken a position as Executive Ombudsman and Senior Partnerships Advisor at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And the governor's Chief Legal Counsel, Nick Bagley, is returning to his position as a law professor at the University of Michigan. And Maria Martinez will assume the role of Acting Chief Legal Counsel while maintaining her duties as Chief Compliance Officer. So I know a big rundown there. I think we may have found a public-facing link that captures that if you weren't able to keep up taking notes from everything I was sharing. But just, again, not unexpected to have some changes and transitions happening right now. But still big news, particularly the number being announced all at once, which I imagine was intentional to kind of package that together, both the announcement of the departures as well as the new appointees. And then was going to pull up to the other staff announcements from Speaker Tate, which I also am not sure. I got a press release from the House Caucus's office. I don't know if it has hit the online news sites yet or not. But as I just mentioned, Shaquila Myers is going to be Speaker-elect Tate's chief of staff. Joshua Lyman, who currently works for Speaker Tate in his current role as state representative, will be external affairs director. And Ricardo White will serve as legislative director for Speaker-elect Tate. And then Kofi Ann Hawthorne will continue her service to the House Democratic Caucus as policy director for the majority. And then Angela Wheeler is currently the House Democratic Legal Counsel. And I mentioned this as a position in the governor's office as well. It's essentially the top lawyer that helps advise both from a governmental legal standpoint as well as an external legal standpoint in terms of what legal challenges could end up happening to policies and legislation. So Angela Wheeler is current House Democratic Legal Counsel and will continue that work. And then John Mulcrone, who is another former colleague of mine that I worked with in a number of different positions during my time in the Senate. He's going to be general counsel to the House of Representatives. And then the last new staff position announced by Speaker-elect Tate today is Amber McCann, who served in Senate Communications for some time, and most recently has been in the Michigan Attorney General's office. Rundown there of some staff changes, staff updates, both in the governor's office as well as the speaker's office. From an advocacy standpoint, I share these updates because it is new people to get to know, new people to keep in mind for outreach in the new legislative session. I was talking to incoming legislator this morning in just in an introductory meeting with some of our partners and perhaps a few folks who are watching right now, but talking about how they don't get their official emails, their staff don't get their official emails until the calendar year turns over. Just important to keep in mind those new names and roles. The other thing I wanted to just give a quick overview on, and we'll put links in, but as I imagine, every advocate, whether you are individually interested or organizationally interested, also very curious about potential policy priorities and agenda items for the new majorities in the coming year. So we're also going to post a couple links to recent interviews that Speaker-elect Joe Tate has done with Stephen Henderson, with Stateside. Was thinking of a different Michigan radio public affairs program, but this one was with Stateside, and talking about a potential agenda and policy items for the House Democratic majority in the new session, and also talks a little bit about his background and priorities. And then a good episode of the Mishmash podcast that WDET Public Radio put together, talking with Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks, talking about her background in interest areas, as well as potential policy agenda for her caucus in the coming year. And then the last link and piece of insight I wanted to mention that came up recently is current Senate Democratic leader Jim Ananich did an interview on To the Point on Wood TV in Grand Rapids with Rick Albin, and talked about some potential priorities for the legislative lame duck session. Again, the expectation is it's going to be a pretty brief lame duck without a lot of fireworks, but also admittedly, the rumors of what could happen have been out in full force already, and always an interesting duality from an advocacy standpoint of how much credence to give rumors to try and be prepared for every scenario, every policy that could come up, but also not trying to invest too much time or energy in something that's a long shot. It's just really hard to tell right now. Things are very unpredictable. It's been 40 years since there's been a scenario like this where both House and Senate majorities are transitioning parties in the coming year. And so hard to say. And then just the interesting aspect too of a Republican-led legislature and a Democratic governor. So that also creates a bit of a firewall from strongly partisan issues that perhaps you might have seen if there was complete Republican control or Democratic control switching to the other side. There might be more efforts to push things prior to the transition, but because of that balanced representation in the governor's office and the legislature, that's not really likely. Anything to actually happen would need to be negotiated between the three sides. and potentially with the incoming majorities and future leaders as well. So just a lot of interesting stuff to be keeping tabs on and keeping in mind that could impact the policy landscape in the next week or two. So that's kind of the rundown. That is the rundown, not kind of the rundown. I don't think I left anything out, but certainly open to taking any questions from anyone at this time. Again, just encourage you, if you don't already, to actively keep tabs on our social media. We are pretty omnipresent, pretty timely with our updates in terms of advocacy opportunities and in policy actions. You know, when we hear something's happening and feel the need to mobilize at our level, we try and make sure the greater public and our partners know that as well, so that others interested in those issues can organize and advocate as well. So we'll continue to keep you posted on that. A busier lame duck expected next week because both the House and Senate will be in a couple days. Again, this week the Senate was the only body in, and then we'll just continue to keep you posted on whether there are any more session days expected. And then just a plug that whatever happens next week, tune in next Friday at 11 a.m. and we will recap it with you and do our best to decipher and discern and break it all down. So thanks again for joining us today and keeping an eye on important policies in the state. And have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks.